So, good afternoon, everyone. To some of you, good morning. To some of you, good evening. My name is Adam Busulan, and I'm a Senior Program Officer at the European Platform for Democratic Elections. So let me welcome you to our today's webinar, which is devoted to the ongoing electoral campaign in Georgia. This is actually the second event in a series of webinars we are hosting ahead of Election Day on October 26th. We are teaming up with the International Society for Fair Elections and Democracy, or ISFED, which is, as many of you know, the founding member of the EPDE. And we are really excited to continue this important conversation as the Election Day draws closer. Now, as many experts and observers believe, what's at stake in these elections isn't just who wins or loses, but this is the Georgia's European future. These elections are a key moment for the country, and that's why we think that today's discussion is so timely. We had a previous seminar or webinar already in July, I think, the first one. So I think we will be able to give you some update on how the election campaign is unfolding. So the elections follow months of political turmoil, including a series of anti-democratic moves by the ruling Georgian Dream Party, such as the passage of the foreign agent law, as we call it, the anti-LGBT legislation, and the use of repressive measures to crack down on civil society and the general on the opposition. So today we want to dive into the recent key moments, or the peaks, as we call them, of the campaign, and see how they have shaped political discourse in the past few weeks. And we'll also be looking closely at some of the challenges or the pitfalls that could impact the final stretch of the campaign. With only 2 weeks left, the stakes couldn't be higher for all the stakeholders, for the voters, for the candidates, for citizen observers, international observers, and the whole international community. Together with our experts who have kindly joined us today, we are going to explore how the campaign is unfolding, what the mood is like among Georgian voters, what are the main challenges so far, and what might happen in the days ahead. I'm sure we'll touch on some big topics, like the highly polarized political environment, the divisive rhetoric, the hybrid threats out there, the level of participation and voter engagement, and the work of election observers, and what role the media are playing in this election. So with that, let's get started. I'm really looking forward to hearing what our speakers will have to say, and I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion afterwards. The webinar is being recorded, so you can watch it later too, and you can put your questions into the chat here. So, but before we start the discussion, let me introduce our panelists. Salome Alania, a project manager at Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, or Foundation, based in Tbilisi. She holds a master's degree in politics, economics, and philosophy from University of Hamburg, and she has an extensive work experience in various non-governmental organizations and some governmental units, as I understood from your bio. And her research interests include peace and security and democratization. Levan Natroshvili is the Deputy Executive Director of the International Society for for Elections and Democracy, ISFED. He's also invited lecturer at the Ilia State University and has previously held teaching positions at Levan Natroshvili, Tbilisi State University, and the University of Georgia. Previously, he worked as program manager at Transparency International Georgia, so he has also a long experience in related to election observation and political finance monitoring. And he also consults international organizations such as ODIHR, OECE, and IFES, and perhaps some more. So, and our third panelist today, David Aprasidze, and I'm sorry, is a professor of political science at Ilia State University and a project manager with the regional office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. But he will speak today on behalf of his own, right, as an expert, as an independent expert. He earned his PhD also from Hamburg University in Germany, and was a Fulbright scholar at Duke University in North Carolina in USA. He has, for many years, collaborated with public agencies and international NGOs in Georgia. So let's start perhaps with David. David, President Zurabishvili, apparently a key figure on the opposition side, I think I can call her this way, has framed the upcoming elections as a referendum between Russia and the West. On the other hand, Georgian Dream has positioned the vote as a choice between war and peace, right? How do you assess, how do you think have Georgian voters been caught up in this polarized narratives of referendums, Russia versus West, a war versus peace, democracy versus authoritarianism? David, the floor is yours.
Adam, thank you very much for the introduction, and I would like to use also the opportunity to welcome our audience, my Georgian colleagues, and also express my gratitude for the organization, to the organizers of this event. Well, that's a very good entry point from your side, and I will also try to provide an overall assessment of the situation in Georgia from an internal observer's perspective. And I think that's what the audience also awaits from us, right? And I'm very much looking also what my Georgian colleagues will more specifically add to this description. But before doing so, you underlined and outlined the importance of the elections for Georgia. Indeed, it's really a decisive, critical elections for Georgian future. But I would say that it's more than Georgian at stake, because I think that it has a regional, can have a regional impact. It definitely will have a certain, at least moral influence on what's going on in Ukraine. And it will have definitely more practical implications for Armenia and potential, well, what we are very much hoping, departure of Armenia from Russian sphere of influence. But let's come back to Georgia, and I will make maybe 1 to 3 general observations, and then during the discussion we can try to go more deep into details, or maybe deal also with other questions. The key message what I want to convey is that actually I believe that October 26th, election day, will mark the beginning of the process, and it will not be the end of it. So we have to be prepared, ready, what evolves after this. Beyond this, I would make the following observations. The first thing is that you mentioned we are just over 2 weeks away from the elections, and we can already see what the authorities actually aiming at, and what is their approach. They are not preparing for free and fair elections. It's very clearly, and I'm pretty sure that Levan will provide some evidences on this side. But on the other hand, let me be a bit critical also towards the political elite in general. In my view, there is no feeling, no urgency that something very serious is happening in this country. I've seen elections in 2003, pre-election period, 2012. You know, these are the critical moments in the modern history of Georgia, the times when the regimes changed, like after the elections or in the aftermath, what's happened in the aftermath of the elections. So I don't see it happening right now. So there is not, how to say, no profound feeling that something is really serious taking place here in the country. I might be wrong. I hope that, I know that on 20th of October, there is a big rally announced, and the people will go to streets to show their answer to questions you, Adam, also listed in the beginning. But, well, at this moment, I have this kind of, lack of observing something really happening in depth. The second moment is that it's really difficult to predict the outcome. Salome will maybe say more on the opinions or how the different groups of the society react to what's going on in the country. But we have two polls, right? I mean, we have two surveys which actually present two completely different realities in Georgia. According to one series of surveys, which is presented by the media, which is more opposition leaned, they suggest the Georgian Dream will emerge as the strongest party with about 30, 32, 33% of the votes, yet far from securing the majority. And the opposition, particularly the four major oppositional centers, combined, they will collect about more than 50% of the votes. And about 10 to 12% will got the percent of votes are likely to be lost because of the 5% threshold we have in our elections. But meanwhile, there is also another survey presented by pro-governmental media sources, and in that survey, GD wins 60% with 60% of the voters share of the voters, and the opposition gets about 32% combined. So it's a reversed picture actually, and only 2 out of these 4 centers even manages or succeeds to cross the threshold. So therefore, the sociology does not work properly in Georgia, right? I personally, I would regard the polls presented by the authorities, of course, completely detached from the reality, but at the same time, we have to carefully take it as a sign what actually the government or the authorities are planning and what are their intentions. They are not really preparing to, peacefully hand over the power if the election outcomes are, let's say, showing that the opposition is winning.
David, let me interrupt you, because there
Yes,
are,
sure.
I mean, if you compare the Gorby polls from the previous years, they were always closer to the final results than the Edison, right?
Not always. That was not the case. Therefore, I would not say that the government would necessarily, or the Central Election Commission will declare the same results or the publish the same results. It would be a pure speculation, of course, even based on the previous examples. But what I'm saying is that this particular poll shows what the government, what are the intentions of the government. Of course, I'm pretty sure, I believe that it's also the message to their own followers, because in elections like this, and especially in countries like Georgia and the transitioning countries, it's important also to secure your own lines. Because if you get some, distrust or some doubts about credibility of own party, then it can have a quite irreversible consequences. Therefore, I understand that first of all, it's a signal sent to own observers that we are strong, that we have power to win this election. But at the same time, of course, it's a signal to the outer world that we are not going to acknowledge the defeat in elections. I might be wrong, of course. I hope I'm wrong, but well, at least we have to take it cautiously. Well, the further observation is that, well, I think that under current legal procedures, and you know that Georgian elections are conducted through proportional system, which means that the mandates will be distributed proportionally among parties. And under the current situation, under the current level of trust toward the authorities, it's very difficult to believe that the authorities will be able to secure the absolute majority. However, we have to take into account also that opposition also remains fragmented. I mean, they managed to create these 4 centers, but actually, if you look, this unification was actually a combination or that adjustment of smaller parties to the bigger, relatively bigger center. So we have not seen the combination or the unification of 2 centers. That did not happen so far. Therefore, after elections, that will be a question. And you mentioned the president, and I hope very much that she will play this role of unifying, because the people, the ordinary citizens, they still question the capacity, the ability of the opposition to govern the country, right? I mean, it's one thing is the challenge, the Georgian government, but another thing is to run the country. And here I at least hope that the opposition will demonstrate otherwise. But again, the role of the president will be crucial. Well, let me conclude with the final observation. Again, I repeat that I think we have to be ready that there will be a lengthy and quite complicated process starting from October 26th, including monitoring of the voter counts, navigating through the legal issues, defending everything what will be at stake, and also navigating the public protests if the authorities really will not acknowledge, or they will present something which is not actually compatible, or the giving you the real reflection of the will of the population. Well, I think that the key factor here will be how close the Georgian dream will be to the votes or the share needed for forming the government. If the share will be narrow, then unfortunately we could expect certain events, defection from the opposition, let's say so. But if the margin is bigger, then I think that the defection, which we have seen in the previous elections as well, will be a challenge for the authorities itself. So it's really crucial for voters, especially for critical voters, those who think that these elections are indeed a juncture for the Georgian future, to go to these elections. And therefore, I think everything what international organizations, including Salome representing one, are doing to mobilize this voter, to motivate them to go to elections, I think it's quite crucial. Well, I will stop here and hope to look forward to questions and the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, David, perfectly connecting us with the next question to Salome. But I wanted just to ask, if we are speaking about the polls, and we understand that it's it's hard to believe them all, and for certain reasons. But how do you explain the dissonance between the polls? They are saying that 80% of Georgians are pro-European, and a quite high percentage of supporters of the Georgian dream. That those numbers, they do not match basically.
Well, purely scientifically, I would not trust, to be honestly, any social surveys conducted in countries like Georgia. But on the other hand, of course, there is, I think, some interpretation behind this. I think that first of all, there are groups in the society who, well, let's say, public servants or the families of public servants who depend on the Georgian dream, and they pretend either they still are under the propaganda or the pressure of the authorities and really do believe that the authorities after elections will manage to normalize relations with the European Union and continue the business as usual. That's also a possibility. But most of them, I think that they are giving the answer which they think that is more safe for their future and for their families, for their job opportunity, and so on and so far. Therefore, I would say that under normal circumstances, the approval rate of the GD is lower than even 30%.
There is already a question in the chat from Anna Renschmidt. Why do you think the Georgian government has done the turn just after Georgia has become an EU accession candidate?
Sorry, can you repeat me the question, and or where can I see it somewhere? Why do you think the Georgian government has done the turn just after they had become? Okay, well, it's really difficult really to answer because there are lots of speculations about this. One of them is that maybe you know that there is a theory about the existing Georgia Global War Party, which is very popular among the support among the authorities and the remaining supporters of the Georgian Dream, which means that actually the Global War Party controlling of European Union, United States, and all global actors worldwide, actually they would anyway try to do any measure to remove Georgian Dream from the authority, from the government. Therefore, they tried to somehow manage this damage, which they believe that would definitely appear before the elections. Therefore, they introduced this law in April, so that it's well, the protest or the proper critical voices were already heard in April, and they believe that even attempting or the building on the more successful story of getting the membership perspective or the getting the status would still would not sufficient for them to secure this victory because of this global war party already having decided that they wanted to remove them from the power. It's pure conspiracy theory, of course, but probably some leaders or maybe one of the most important key figure in the Georgian Dream does it believe, or it's something they just think that this effect of rallying around the flag works in this regard. Again, it's really difficult, and it will be difficult to have a more rational explanation for that, because I also believe that without introduction of this law, without jeopardizing the EU-Georgian relations, Georgian Dream would have far better chances to stay in power.
I think with this we can go over to Salome, and the question here is also you've mentioned it already, David, that there is a potential for for high participation in this election in a way. So how would you assess this? Is there a potential, Salome, for a high voter turnout, and if you compare it with the previous elections, how does the voter engagement changed since 2020? And why? Is it because there are so great messages and programs of the parties, or is because of the polarization of ideologies. Yeah.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you. I'll also use join David to thank to the European Platform for Democracy, Democratic Elections, and thank you, David, for your input. As for voter turnout, that's one thing which is quite crucial in the current political environment. And as we also see trends that more and more voters make their decisions on the very last moments, some of them even in the voting booths, we thought that there was some opportunity here. So voting patterns, so more and more often voters pay attention to certain topics rather than long-term loyalty to one or another party. But voting patterns in Georgian case is even more different from the trends, as usually voters are not making decisions based solo on ideological or political preferences. But besides this, we still decided to engage in implementing voting advising applications, so to have some perspective of voting patterns and behaviors, and we tried it first time in 2020. And of course, here comes the natural question. If voters do not make their decisions based on political ideologies or political policy preferences, then why to implement Compass at all? So in general, voting advising application like GeoCompass became quite a popular tool, and voters compare their policy preferences on major issues with the positions of political parties. But back in 2020 GeoCompass, we had a case that party being ideologically far from one's own voters and yet receiving the high share of votes. That implied that voters did not necessarily care much about policy preferences and ideological positions, and when they chose a party to vote for. However, this argument, I think, should be made cautiously. It's one thing to place parties and voters on ideological dimensions, and another thing to determine how this same political party mobilizes its own voters during electoral campaigns, what we actually see now. So Georgian politics is prone to lead to emotional and protest votings, but at the same time, Georgian voters are used to charismatic leaders, which parties still use to connect with their voters. All these aspects of voting behavior and party-voter linkage in general coexist here. So it's not reasonable to either entirely dismiss the importance of ideologies in Georgian elections or to expect that Georgian voters should only pay attention to policy offerings. This is much more complicated. So current elections, as all of you mentioned, is crucial in Georgia's political life. And what the latest polls show is that in current Georgian elections, we have very high number of undecided voters, which is between 24 to 27%. So there is this hunger of knowledge whom to vote and where they are standing. Good illustration of this pattern is that after 3 days of launching the GeoCompass, so a few days ago, we had 17,000 users, which compared to the same period of 2020 elections is 5 times more. Simply put, the elections, there is this high demand of the electorate, whom to vote and where do they stand, to understand, to have this in-depth understanding. So the GeoCompass isn't simply say easily accessible and user-friendly. And since vast majority of voters rarely have the time, like I assume all of you agree, and enthusiasts to closely study all the party programs and manifestos, and in Georgian case, most frankly speaking, most of the parties do not have current document with policy positions. This compass enables political scientists to translate hours of political education to less than 7 minutes effort. To repeat over and over, of course, from our side, that this project is intending only to inform users about their positions, but there is no way that its outcome is an advice on how to vote or whom to vote. Users have to make their own choices. And I just want to mention that in this case, this application, in order to have more credibility and to guarantee and ensure neutrality, it's in cooperation with many organizations supported by EU, USAID, German political foundations, which is by the way a very rare case because usually we do not work together. And since we represent all different political spectrums, from social democrats to Greens, liberals, conservatives, it's all the more important that by carrying Compass all together, we ensure neutrality, so that no political party could be seen as privileged, and technically it's even impossible to have privileged results. But and we want to make, due to our joint support, the tool is absolutely unbiased. And also to underline some major trends and to compare to 2020, back in 2020, the average Georgian voters tended to be left-leaning when it came to economic issues and liberal on socio-cultural dimensions of the ideological plane. And back then, most parties were either left-wing and culturally conservative, or liberal and right-wing. That means that in two-dimensional ideologies, we had the ideological vacuum, liberal left and conservative right. They have not been represented at all in the Georgian political spectrum. And it's kind of changed this time. And let me share my screen, the final results of the Compass, if all of you see it. Is it evident on the screen? The picture of the political landscape has been changed for these elections, as most of the parties are allocated on liberal left dimension. And interestingly, the winner party of 2020 elections was also the party that was closest to the average or the median voter. And also, one of the reasons, I don't, of course, imply that Compass influenced it, but basically there was this vacuum in the political spectrum. In the policy areas related to the economy, healthcare, and education, the average voters was left of the center, and it also seems that this aspect is taken into consideration by most of the political parties. And as you see, most of the opposition parties are on left-leaning progressive scale, while we have, of course, the liberal part, economically right, and at the end, Georgian Dream and is on the economically left conservative scale. And lastly, I'm absolutely aware that in the current political landscape, it's very difficult and almost impossible to think about it. But why this Compass is also important, not only from voter advising perspective, but it's a huge database, because time will pass and we will have an opportunity to study voting patterns and voting behaviors of Georgia. We have an opportunity to compare to 2020 pattern with sample size of 40,000 users. Now, currently for today, we have already half of it. In 4 days, we have 22,000 voters, and we expect maximum 60 to 80,000 voters to engage in it. So it creates a huge database, which is an open source. Of course, confidentiality of the voters are absolutely of the users are ensured, but a huge database for the researchers in academia to study the political landscape. And thank you for your time. I hope I did not use much of your time.
Thank you, Salome. It's perfect timing. So I see we have another 3 questions already in the chat, but maybe I think one of them could be relevant here at this stage, which is the question: how do you think naming positions prime minister candidate before the elections could have a positive or negative impact? Is it something you could already you have maybe data already, or kind of research on that, or
honestly, we do not have any kind of scientific evidence of that, but looking at the Georgia political landscape for the moment, and it's quite vulnerable, I'd rather say, and that it's better that such kind of statements, which is crucial and essential for the further after election process, of course, to be led by the country, will only damage the process. So it's better for the moment political parties to focus on electoral campaigns. And as a neutral party, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, we still claim that for all the political parties, for all the parties engaged, all political spectrum, and rather the decision of the political standings and positions to be made, and to be made public known only after the elections, not to infringe the process itself.
Mm-hmm. And Salome, could you briefly elaborate on the undecided voters, perhaps?
Mm-hmm.
What is the number?
The undecided voters is around 24 to 27%, and according to the latest polls, mainly they are in western part of the Georgia, and there is this kind of lack of knowledge of each and every political party, because as you know, some political parties united and some now have the common platforms, and voters still need to kind of get accustomed with these new unities. So they have these difficulties to engage in the election process. And as I know, many organizations currently, as well as political parties, are actively working with such voters.
Okay, so let's go over maybe to Levan now. Levan, in your recent report published yesterday, it appears there are significant concerns regarding election management, and we are talking, election experts and observers. So this is a proper election observation report where you have particular sections on different stages, different aspects of elections. So I see that one of the biggest issues now at this stage is the preparation, is the composition of election commissions, the preparations for them, and the domination of the ruling party in the commissions, especially on the lower level, and of course a permanent issue with misuse of state resources, and the blurring of lines between the ruling party and the state. Am I interpreting this report correctly?
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for organizing this event and for providing this opportunity to us to provide our opinions to the distinguished audience. As for the question and the election environment in general, I would start with the general context. My colleagues actually covered parts of this context, but we should once again underline the importance of these elections. So this is the first time when Georgia will have parliamentary elections conducted through fully proportional electoral system with 5% threshold and without pre-election blocks, electoral blocks, which of course has its own implications. First of all, it should be more competitive because of electoral system, and of course such kind of electoral systems are more advantageous for the opposition parties, and it increases the temperature as well, because the chances of losing the power is higher in this case. It has also implications for low opposition parties because of the higher threshold. It makes the life of small political parties, of course, harder. And actually, during the previous couple of months, opposition parties tried to somehow unite under certain groupings in order to make sure that they will overcome the threshold, 5% threshold, and affected their election campaign as well. Second, the distinctive feature is that Georgia got its candidate status for EU membership, and it is the first elections after that, and it will be a test not only for Georgia's democracy, but it will be a kind of an exam for the European Union as well. And what we see right now, this exam will not be passed satisfactorily, because the statements coming from various politicians in European Union, from the Embassy of the European Union, the European Parliament, for instance, yesterday issued a statement. So they very clearly see democratic backsliding and anti-Western, anti-European, Eurosceptic, policies of Georgian government and the ruling party. And this month we're gonna have another enlargement report coming from the European Commission, and most probably, of course, this report will not recommend the European Council to advance in this process with Georgia in joining the European Union, and of course it will have an implication for Georgian public as well. And third one is actually the distinctive feature is that for these elections we're gonna use electronic technologies. The scale of this usage is unprecedented, and I guess one of the questions also related to this issue, we basically are going to use two kinds of machines, electronic machines. So first one is about voter verification, and second one is voting and counting machines. So we're gonna have two main machines. In general, we can say that we trust the reliability of this kind of machines. So they are provided by trustful provider, the American company, and in general, so we try to convey the message in the society together with the election administration that these machines are safe and the voter secrecy will be protected, and it will somehow make the life of Georgian voters easier. They can vote easier. The results will be announced faster, at least preliminary results, and it will somehow decrease the temperature, political temperature, after the closing of polling stations, and it is very important for Georgia. But yeah, it also creates some risks, of course, because about 90% of voters will vote with the help of these electronic machines, and it is the first time for them, most of them. And of course, there will be some technology-related, risks, which should be addressed during the election day, and how prepared the election commissions are for that. So we don't know, of course, exactly. As for the election campaign itself and the observation and problems and positive and negative trends. So as my colleagues mentioned, of course, this kind of referendum issue is very popular in Georgia. So the ruling party also uses this word, and the opposition as well. What is very typical for the ruling party election campaign is that they have very kind of hate and fear campaign, I would say. So they try to scare the society with the war. So that's a kind of a very clear message of the government, and they basically do not hesitate to use even the case of Ukraine in their campaign. So you can see the billboards in the streets where they just compare the destroy charge in Ukraine and Georgian charge. So they say that this is war and this is peace, and you should choose between war and peace, which is not very, I don't know, moralistic, I guess. So that's why moral. So that's why, of course, they are trying their best to use each and every reason to somehow scare the society, and because of that, get more votes. How effective this campaign can be, so we don't know. We'll see, of course, in 16 days. They also have very harsh anti-Western and Eurosceptic campaign. This is also very clear. They criticize very harshly Western politicians, I guess regularly on everyday kind of messaging and statements. They have at least one part of their messages related to criticism of European politicians or US politicians. And of course, it's very kind of not very pleasant, I guess, the campaign. They also have very harsh attitudes toward the civil society organizations and media organizations with critical editorial policies. The audience, I'm sure, that is informed about the legislation, so-called Russian law, the law on transparency of foreign influence, which basically is enacted, is working right now. However, right now we can say that the government still tries to be careful with executing this legislation, and so far none of the big organizations have been addressed by the Ministry of Justice to register in this so-called foreign agents registry. Most probably they are waiting for the elections. However, at the same time, there was a case related to the Transparency International, Georgian chapter of Transparency International, when the Anti-Corruption Bureau, an institution which is in charge of overseeing political party finance issue in Georgia, they restricted the work of Transparency International for a while, labeling this organization as kind of similar to political parties, so the person with the electoral goals. After the statement of the Prime Minister, so the Bureau changed its opinion, which once again underlined the lack of independence of this Bureau. On the side of the opposition, my colleagues covered this issue pretty comprehensively, so we basically have four major groupings in the opposition who have significant chances to overcome 5% thresholds, and most probably they will do. So there are some smaller parties which can some chances to overcome a threshold, but yeah, it's not decided yet. Of course, the role of the president is very important as well. One of the questions also related to that, and the president tries somehow to mediate between various political parties in the opposition. So the opposition party signed so-called charter, where there are some provisions about potential distribution of seats and some technocratic government after the elections and reforms in various kind of public policies. However, at this point, of course, it's still this role of the president is not very clear for many experts, I guess. So she tries her best to somehow show herself as a kind of mediator and the protagonist of Georgia's European integration. The opposition parties also try their best to do the same, actually, to somehow to depict themselves as kind of pro-European and the only chances of Georgia's pro-European future. But still, we have a bit kind of vague situation in this regard. The role of the president is not very decided right now. As for the pre-election environment itself, and you mentioned the election administration, unfortunately, the electoral reform, which was finalized this year, did not once again ensure the independence of the election administration and at each and every level. So we have 3 levels of election commissions. So the rule for composing the commissions are the same, actually, and the ruling party still controls informally, but controls the majority in these commissions, which means that, of course, the trust in their work is much lower than it is needed. It means that you should not exclude any kind of steps taken by the election administration, and of course, it further increases the temperature. Another problem you mentioned is the issues of administrative resources, and we have seen during this period as well the massive usage of administrative resources, and this was the case in previous elections and for these elections as well. Unfortunately, since Georgia has a history of one-party governance all the time, so it controls each and every resources, administrative resources at central and local levels, and which means that the government party has the kind of exclusive access to these resources, and of course, it creates not very equal kind of level playing field for these elections as well. However, we can say that in terms of political finance, some political parties, opposition political parties, could get quite large amounts of money for these elections, we're talking about millions of Georgian laris, and we can say that they still have some resources to campaign. They have some resources to put some advertisements, for instance, and they have access to pro-opposition media, and more or less they can, reach their electorate, which is of course good. How effective these campaigns of the opposition will be, so we'll see, of course, after the election day. Yeah, this is very briefly from my side. If you have any questions, yeah.
I see a question here from Marie Mondras from Sciences Po in Paris, which is perhaps related also to how we see the composition of election, management bodies and possibility of fraud. She asked, so far you did not address the high probability of fraud and GD stealing the votes. Electronic vote may facilitate rigging. It's a question. What will if the authorities publish fraudulent results? This is the one question. And do you really believe that President Zurabishvili will take the risk of confronting Ivanishvili? So these are perhaps different questions. Maybe we can answer the second one then in the bigger group. We still have a few minutes left. But maybe do you agree that electronic machines, which are actually the counting machines, and we know that no matters how you vote, matters how you count the vote, right?
Yeah, I can answer a couple of questions there. As for the electronic machines, I would not say that they can be used for rigging, kind of easier, I guess, rigging than the traditional, methods, because, these electronic machines we are using in Georgia still have paper trail. So these ballot papers are paper ballot papers, and actually the official results are announced only after manual counting of this ballot paper. So the electronic machines will count votes, but this will be only preliminary votes. And after manual counting by hand, this will be, the official results. And I doubt that, it is possible to massively rig elections through these electronic machines. The main problem usually in Georgia is to mobilize, supporters, to intimidate voters and get more votes than you deserve through these kinds of methods, rather than rigging, falsifying results during the election day. Of course, there will be some cases maybe of multiple voting or proxy voting, some kind of carousels, so-called carousels, but I doubt that the scale of these violations can be so big that it can have a significant impact on the results.
Thank you. I see that there are two questions, I think, on the role of President Zurabishvili, right? So the one is, do you really believe that Zurabishvili will take the risk of confronting Ivanishvili? And the second one is what influence do you think Zurabishvili's own candidacy might have on the overall
She actually already confronted Ivanishvili quite harshly, I would say, a couple of times, and I cannot say that she didn't cross some red lines and now she will not do it or something like this, because she used to be very critical if you look back. So that's why I don't think that she can have any kind of restraints now. As for her role, yeah, as I said, so for me it's a bit, unclear, the role of her in these processes. It is a positive role for sure, because she is the only public institution, I guess, which is a keen supporter of European integration of Georgia and resists to the pro-Russian policies of Georgia, which is very kind of important thing. However, in this electoral processes, the role of a president is not very clear, of course, because for the audience, I can say that the president in Georgia will be elected by the parliament after the parliamentary elections indirectly. So the president will not be elected directly in Georgia anymore. So these parliamentary elections also will define the also the candidacy for future presidency of Georgia as well. So President Zurabishvili will decide to become a president for another term, or she wants to be to have some other role. So it's not clear for me yet.
And Salome and David, please feel free also to comment on this, or maybe we can go over to the question about the Russian also influence, and maybe to add to. Yes, David.
Let me briefly, Salome, if you want, you can go ahead. Well, briefly about the Salome's roles, I think I completely agree with what Levan said, and then, well, we could also put the question in a more, deliberate way. I mean, what other ways we have? I mean, the Zurabishvili plays a positive role, and it's really important indeed, as Levan mentioned, that this is the only official public institution engaged in this process, right? The rest, all other institutions are captured by the Georgian Dream completely, including the Constitutional Court. We seen the decision of the court yesterday, right? But then is one crucial role of the president still. This is after elections, because the president still has to nominate the candidacy of the prime minister officially. So for the legal, legitimization of the authorities of the outcome of the election, still Zurabishvili plays a key role. Therefore, I think that she got this, well, that's she will do this role. As for the Russia, I will answer maybe a couple of questions here. Of course. Sorry?
The question, maybe just to put it verbally here, do voters in Georgia worry about possible aggression on them from Russia, and what kind of leverage does the Russian regime have on Georgia? And there is another question which goes in the same direction, right? Yeah, what about the Georgian Dream? Do people in Georgia now perceive that Georgian Dream is revealing its true self and working to align with Russian interests?
Well, of course, Russia has, it's a factor, right? I mean, we have two territories in Georgia where the Russian soldiers have their foot. I mean, therefore, it's quite obvious that Russia is a factor here in Georgia. However, the question is, what type of involvement of Russian influence do we have in mind? If it's influence over politics, malign influence, that's we see every day. And that's actually the very fact that our authorities are criticizing and not even, increasingly anti-European in their statements, but they stop and they are very reluctant to say anything against Russia. That's already the quite strong evidence that Russia influence is there. But what the population is afraid of, this is the military aggression. Theoretically, everything is possible, and the authorities playing on this fear. Actually, Levan has mentioned that they are playing this with this this street campaign, showing comparing the Ukraine with Georgia, Ukrainization, using this term. They are playing this card, of course, but on the other hand, realistically, Russia has no military means or military possibility to intervene into Georgian politics. That's not excluded, of course, but I don't think that can happen. Therefore, Russia's role is there, but it's limited. It will not be decisive in the elections, for the elections outcome. As for the Georgian Dream, well, again, it's a speculation why it was pro-European until to a certain moment, and why it tried to gain take more the pro-Russian ground later on. I guess that the simple question is grab on power, this corruption with power, because they believe that the closer Georgia gets to Europe, the more reforms they have, the country has to implement, and they're implementing these reforms harms their grip on power. And therefore, they prefer. I mean, Ivanishvili in particular made this decision. It's more important for him what is in his particular interest than the interest of the country. Very simple explanation. It's more complex, I do believe, the situation, but I think that it's what it is.
Thank you. I see. Maybe a last question, because I think we see another questions. Okay, there are two comments from Marie Mondras directly to her question. The future president of Georgia will be elected only in part by parliamentarians. Zurabishvili told us in Tbilisi that she will appoint a technical PM to form a technical government. This technical government is also a kind of intrigue. We should keep an eye on that, but maybe on just to see also the other side, and maybe I'm not sure. I see the question from Grzegorz Lewocki, and actually I try to avoid all those big global perspective for this discussion. I hope we'll have an opportunity to tackle this also issue. Of course, the election doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? We have elections in the US, we have China influence, and Russia and Ukraine, and all the international background. But maybe the role of China will leave for the next webinar. But the last question, maybe. You've mentioned that there was a new resolution of the European Parliament, and this is the question here. And Salome, Levan, and David, please feel free to comment on this. Grzegorz Lewocki doesn't give up. Okay, so we will take the last question also. It's a technical one. What do you think is the impact of the Georgian Parliament resolution adopted yesterday? Can it backfire? Specifically, the fact that it requested personal sanctions against Ivanishvili. The government has used it as a demonstration of foreign interference in the elections. David, Salome.
Just let me add to that point, to the European elections, to the European Parliament resolution. Honestly, this resolution to be translated into the ordinary citizens, to the voters' language who are outside of the capital bubbles and who are not maybe that much engaged in the political process as each and every of us are on daily basis, can be translated quite simply, because messaging and clearing was quite evident maybe than never before. It's seizing the visa liberalization, which means free movement of the people. And lately, last years, we have highest number of immigration, and the visa liberalization is a benefit that is kind of the core support for the moment for those people who are using it. So this kind of wording made quite a mood in the society. Of course, we can't say the same about the sanctions. I mean, it creates a general mood, but it's difficult to measure what kind of influence it has. But in sense of the European Parliament clear messaging, it definitely had its quite obvious sentiments within the society, I would rather argue.
Any comments, David, Levan?
Just to add a couple of words on that. So this is not the first time when the European Parliament uses such a harsh language against the Georgian dream, even requesting sanctioning within Ivanishvili. So that's why, yes, it is used in the campaign of the ruling party. They basically are trying to say that European Union, United States, basically are trying to intervene in internal politics of Georgia. But not only this resolution of the European Parliament is used for this kind of campaign. The statements of the ambassador of the European Union, Georgia, and the statements of various ambassadors, for instance, the German ambassador and other ambassador statements, are very intensely used by government government-controlled media outlets, actually, in order to show that, look, the West is trying to intervene in internal politics. So that's why I guess the resolution of the European Parliament will be added to this kind of campaign. However, of course, still this will may have impact on the opinion of those groups of electorate, I guess, electorate who are not very pro-Western, I would say, so who are already irritated by the role of the Europe and the West in Georgia, and they are more kind of pro-Russian leaning ones. So that's why I don't think that it can change significantly anything in terms of public opinion, I guess.
So maybe to connect the last question, is that true that Georgian citizens who are living abroad cannot register for voting? This whole issue of registering and opportunities to vote abroad was already discussed by the observers. Also, I know that ISFED was active in supporting the increase of numbers of polling stations abroad to allow people to vote. Many of them are in Europe. So how do you assess?
That's absolutely right. Yes, we have been advocating for opening more polling stations. As of today, so there are only 60 polling stations across the world, which is absolutely not enough, of course, because we have a huge diaspora in many countries. But unfortunately, the government of Georgia and the election administration of Georgia did not express their will to change the legislation and to open more polling stations. They interpret the legislation in a way that the polling stations can be opened only in the buildings of diplomatic representations, embassies, and consulates. And of course, it significantly limits the possibility to open more precincts. So that's the main problem. So we don't have internet voting, we don't have postal voting, and of course, the number of polling stations physically opened abroad matters. But unfortunately, the government did not express its will to increase the number of these polling stations, most probably because the results coming from the diaspora outside kind of precincts, outside of country precincts, is mostly different from the internal results, in a way that the opposition gets more votes abroad than in the country. That can be one of the explanation why they did not want to open more voting stations.
Maybe one additional question here. If you compare how many, or can you tell us how many polling stations are more or less in the Western countries? How many polling stations are opened in Russia, for example?
In Russia, there are no polling stations because we don't have diplomatic relations with Russia, and so we never open polling stations in Russia. We didn't open polling stations in Ukraine, for instance, for these elections because of war. And now the election administration considers the case of Israel. One polling station has been already opened there, but because of this attack from Iran, so they are discussing the possibility to close this polling station. So it means that the problem still is here. So lack of enough number of polling stations. For instance, if we take the example of United States, so there are only 3 cities across the United States where Georgian government has Ministry of Foreign Affairs has its own consulates, on diplomatic representations, and a lot of people living outside New York, San Francisco, and Washington D.C. They cannot vote, so they should cross, I don't know, hundreds and maybe thousands of kilometers to get to the polling station, and of course it significantly decreases their kind of possibilities to participate in elections.
Okay. So if there are no immediate reactions to what Levan said, I would say that this brings us to the end of today's webinar. I promise that we will come back to the global perspective during the next two webinars we are planning next week. Next week at the same time on Thursday at 3 o'clock, and in 2 weeks, shortly before the election day. So another 2 webinars are in the pipeline. You are all welcome to join. And thank you very much, the panelists, Salome and David, Levan. Thank you very much for your insights and your expertise, and thank you for the lively chat here with interesting questions. I invite you again to the next webinars next week and in 2 weeks. And yeah, stay safe and see you in Tbilisi.